Amen. Yeah, I know, that would be terrible recording.
Oh, yeah.
Now, last presentation. So I'm just trying to rub out things that we spoke about outside of class. The last presentation, we developed our thinking about the everlasting gospel, and we then began to think about probationary time, and I began to reconfigure these 3 steps in the following manner: that you have the first and the second arriving at the same time. The first is the point in time, and the second is time attached with it, and then you get to the 3rd step.
Excuse me. Just need to grab them.
Well, maybe, yes.
Oh, I'm thinking for
And that side.
I think that was it.
That's it.
So,
That actually goes along a little bit with the point period too, doesn't it?
yes,
In a sense.
yeah, there is this point period, but it wasn't intentional.
No.
So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just leave that for the moment, and maybe if we have time we'll pick up on it. So I want to go into our notes and develop our thinking about the 3rd step. Now, we've been teaching for a long time in this movement that the everlasting gospel is a prophetic message that creates, develops 2 classes of people, and then at the end of that experience, these 2 classes demonstrate or exhibit what they are. And everything that we've drawn here agrees with all of this information. But when we were doing that, we would stress the point that the first and second angel's messages, according to this history here, has probationary time attached to it. And these lines that we're seeing have time, so I deliberately put the time element, in this case it was 4 years and 6 months, to demonstrate that the first and second messages are related to time.
Yeah.
But the 3rd message is a singular event. It happens on a single day. There's no time to do anything. All that's going to happen is you're going to demonstrate what you have been all through this history. This model here doesn't really mitigate against that. It's the same principle, but we just put the first and second together. And as I say, if we have time, we'll address this issue in some depth to explain why we get this and how it interacts with this reform life. But we've been quite consistent in our message that the 3rd step is a singular point in time. Now, if you look at any distant object, when I say an object, if there were 2 objects that were close together, and they're so close together that when you look at them from a distance you can just see a singular point. But the closer you get to that pair of things here, they become wider and wider apart the closer you get. Or you can use a telescope or a pair of binoculars. So if you think about stargazing, astronomy, if you look with the naked eye, many of the things that you see in the sky are not singular stars. They're either a cluster of stars, or sometimes even a galaxy, or a constellation. And it's not always these singular points that we're seeing. If you look with increasing magnification, you see that there's a lot more that's going on than just this single point. And we've been travelling on our journey for quite some time, going from number 1 and 2, and we're headed closer and closer to number 3. And the closer we've got to number 3, what we're beginning to realise is that the statement that we made originally, that the third step is just a singular point, isn't quite true. I think it's probably too strong to say we made a mistake, because I don't think we had. And in many ways it is still this singular event. But what we're beginning to see now is that there's a lot of things that are happening at that point in history. And the information is so detailed that as we've begun to get closer, this line got wider and wider until we actually got to the point where we saw that it wasn't just one point, one line, but in fact there were two. There were 2 lines, 2 waymarks, very close to one another. But as we've got closer and closer to this, we see that they get wider and wider. And the reason why they're getting wider is not to indicate time.
Gonna take off.
I think the bangers are going to interfere with the filming, that's what she's worried about. Well, wait a minute, I think she's going to tape up those...
Or tie them up. I think isn't there ties on the bottom? There's ropes on the bottom of the ties. I'm not that that would stop it totally, but if you tied it tightly at night onto it. Yeah, that one looks like it might be.
Oh no, she's typing.
Oh, yeah, it sounds like it's your type.
Just while we're waiting with that, when the understanding of the close of probation is it happened for someone here and someone here and someone between 2 lines, so the close of probation didn't necessarily happen for you on Tuesday and me on Tuesday, it happened for you on Tuesday, me Wednesday, then on Thursday,
Well, that's
that
like
kind of thing.
progressive work or the
So-
period.
So that's a serious question, it's not just a minor question that we can
Oh,
just off
well-
the cuff speak about.
Just a quick one. that
Just
you
a
can
quickie,
listen.
yeah. No, well, is that kind of what you're saying as you've been delving? It's a similar type of situation?
He's
What you're
actually
about-
asking you to tell him what you're going to tell him.
No, I'm just saying what you're explaining
No.
now. Is it similar to
No.
that? No, it's not. Okay.
Yes. No, yes. I don't know. Kind of.
Well, you know what I'm talking about, don't
I know
you?
what you're talking about.
Ah, dear. Ellen White says names are progressive names, rejected names, accepted as
Yeah.
yeah, progressive work.
I mean, there has to come a day like Wednesday, whatever, it's done. But,
Yeah.
you know, before that, it's obviously
There's a final moment eventually, but yeah. there's
someone's name has to
progressive.
be last and we go, now we're done.
That's it. We don't. No.
Okay. If it's in alphabetical order or not.
First their name or surname.
Yeah, that's it.
right.
And is it your original name you were born with? Is it one you changed to, or you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I say that because I changed my name
Oh.
when I was 16. Our family changed their name. Just the spelling.
Oh.
So Kate Holland.
From Holland.
Yeah. So her name was spelt the Dutch way, but we tried to set up.
M-E-S-E-R,
Yeah.
Mesa. People
So we-
would call him Mesa all the time.
So
And you probably can sympathise with that, right? Given your surname.
then we changed the E and the S to an A and a C to make it Mace
Mesa,
with an
so
R,
that it
Mesa.
actually...
Oh, Mesa.
Yeah,
So now they call
him
them Macca.
Mac or Macur.
You can't win, can you?
Macur. Mr. Macur. It's like... like McDonald, but it's Macca.
So I've been tempted to change it back to the original
But
spelling.
apparently it was Moses in.
Yeah, our surname is Moses. But when the Germans invaded Holland, my family changed their name to Mesa.
So that
From
they,
Moses.
for obvious reasons. Although it didn't help in the end because the parents were still killed in front of the children. Well, it must be.
I obviously have Jewish background. Because Mouse is
I found some Jews in my background too, apparently over in Prussian Jews in Germany. But I'm mostly probably Irish, but I've got that other little side there as well, which I was surprised at. Yeah. Would have been your grandparents.
Yeah.
Were killed.
I think that might be it, I hope.
They must have been rebellious to intermarry.
Yeah, I don't know. Because I never met my grandparents, the Germans just killed them.
Yeah. They in front of his father and his siblings. And then his dad ended up moving, came out here on the Merchant Navy or something, and then he jumped ship. Just disappeared.
So it wasn't a criminal
No.
from England.
We'll
Not before he got here anyway.
Everyone right?
Yeah, we're back to starting.
let's
Okay,
back
take
together.
2.
hopefully
It's all quieter now.
let's have a quick word of prayer again to refocus our minds.
Okay. Stoney, you have to get me.
Amen.
I'll get
So what we've seen is this third step has a lot more information contained in it than we at first suspected. And we've realised that there are in fact 2 waymarks that we're going to have to deal with when it comes to the third step. So we're identifying the third step now in the following fashion. It covers this short period of time between these 2 waymarks, and we're identifying these 2 waymarks as midnight and midnight cry. When,
Is this in addition to
in addition to what?
the other midnight cry?
No, this is it.
Oh, okay.
It's only.
So, what I've subtly done, which was very sneaky of me, you never noticed, well you kind of noticed because you said, what is this thing?
Yeah, I know you lowered that bottom one and finished it at the first bit, not second.
Oh, it's even worse than that.
Oh, okay.
It's even worse than that. Because what I've done is, let me rub some of this information out. This is Millerite history. And we've got from April to October the arrival of the second message, the arrival of the third, and then here we would have the empowerment of the second. And this is the midnight cry.
Yeah.
So if we go to let's go to Matthew 25. Matthew Matthew 25 and pick up from verse 5. Matthew 25 verse 5. While the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. Now, Brother Patrick still hasn't really completed his reform lines, and he's going to go into the details of some of this symbology in this chapter, so I'm not going to pick out all the details. I only want to make one point here. So it says, while the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. So I'm not going to worry about what waymark that is, but it's verse 6 I'm interested in. It says, at midnight there was a cry made, behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. Then all those virgins, the 10 of them, arose, because all 10 are sleeping, trimmed their lamps, and the foolish said unto the wise, give us of your oil, for our lamps are gone out. But the wise answered, saying, not so, lest there be not enough for us and you, but go you rather to them that sell, and buy for yourselves. And verse 10, while they went to buy, this is all I want to pick up, while they went to buy. So we're here, and what are the foolish virgins doing?
Sleeping. Oh, they go on to buy.
Verse 10, and while they went to buy.
Yes.
So they've gone to buy. So we haven't gone into all this parable, and we're not going to, but... Sorry?
Oh, no, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I thought he was asking me a question. There's a house. Whose house is it? Don't have to answer because you might not know the parable well enough. This is the bride's house. And here are these 10 virgins. They're outside of her house waiting. And 5 are wise, 5 are foolish. So there's 10 of them all together. Then it says at midnight there was a cry made, and they all wake up. Sorry. They all wake up, and they get into a bit of a kerfuffle. They pour their oil that was in their vessels into their lamps. The 5 foolish haven't got any extra oil, and the procession is moving along. Then the 5 wise virgins join the procession, and the 5 foolish go to the market to go and buy something. So you can see here that the separation between the two classes happens right here. You see that?
Yes.
Yep. And then we'll skip over the parable. There's another house here. And whose house is that one? This is the bridegroom's house. Because that's where everybody's headed. And the 5 wise are in with them. Then eventually they all go into the bridegroom's house, so none of this exists, and then the door's shut. And then these 5 foolish, they come all the way from the market, go to the door, knock on the door and try to get in. And then you get to the very end, and verse 11 says, afterwards came also the other virgins, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. But he answered and said, verily I say unto you, I know you not. Watch therefore that ye know, for ye know neither the day nor the hour wherein the Son of Man cometh. So, here there's this shut door. Shut doors are another symbol in Bible prophecy. The first shut door that you come across is the shut door in Noah, the story of Noah. So there's a shut door there. There's many different shut doors. And the shut door, we can easily mark at 1844. How can we mark the shut door in 1844? By the fact that Christ is in the holy place all the way through this history, and here he's going to leave the holy place, and symbolically the doors of the holy place get shut, and then he's going to move to the most holy place, and the door to the most holy place is open. So you have an open and shut door right here. So often we mark a shut door here. We okay with that? Makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
Problem is this message here. Second angel's message says what? You're righteous. Or it says you're fallen. So if you're fallen, there's a statement that's being made about you that you've fallen into perdition. So how do you know that? How do you know someone's fallen? You have to observe it, you have to see some kind of conduct, some kind of behaviour. It's a pronouncement of judgment. And again, I don't want to get too far into this, but all I'm saying is that the second way marks, you get this characteristic that something bad is happening. If I can just leave it at that level. Here, you've got the wise and the foolish separated when they realise they're in this crisis, and do these foolish actually know anything's bad going to happen to them? They don't even realise their fate is already sealed. They've gone to the market, it doesn't tell you what happens to the oil or not. They've bought something, perhaps, or they may not have. They go back to the bridegroom house and they say, let us in, we've come to enjoy the feast. And he says, I don't even know who you are, because you weren't part of the bridal party, you weren't invited. So the separation is happening here, but they don't realise this separation is going on until you get right to the end. Then you've got this shut door. Now, remember, this is a complex message dealing with real people, real histories that span days, years, months, even years. And when we draw these little sticks everywhere, we got those sticks from those plummet lines, remember?
Yeah.
And those plummet lines represent what? Righteousness.
Yes.
They're righteousness, and this is judgment and righteousness.
That's right.
So here's these lines of righteousness, and we put dates and events to those righteous things because we're historians and we like numbers, remember? But we have to be careful not to become beguiled and deceived to thinking that everything just happens at this instant. And perhaps the easiest way that I can explain that, or remind you of it, because it's already been explained, is here in 1798, this angel came down from heaven. Remember, that's what Brother Patrick taught you. And what he brings with him is information. Yeah? There's this information. Now, I've said there's this angel coming down, but there's not a real angel coming down, because that angel is who?
No, people.
People. This is people.
The messengers.
Yeah, they're messengers. And they've got a message, which means they're a pipe.
Yes.
And in that pipe is oil, which is the Holy Spirit. So the Holy Spirit is doing something to human beings. And He's giving them light. But that light's already been given in the Scriptures. It's already there, printed for hundreds of years. But nobody understands it. So all that's going to happen now is when they read those messages, same messages that everybody's been reading for hundreds of years, now they're going to see, because the Holy Spirit's going to lighten those words up, that their eyes are going to be enlightened. Remember Jonathan and the honey? He could see now what those words mean. So when it says in the year that King Uzziah died, we can all read English. It's not an exercise in English, it's an exercise in what does that all mean?
Yeah.
So it's not an issue of grammar. Most of us don't understand what it means when Uzziah dies. And you need the Holy Spirit to illuminate that information. You know, we call it highlighting. I've noticed everybody's highlighting their Bibles. It's the same kind of thing, to make it stand out. So now, these words that you're familiar with, that you've read before, begin to stand out. But because we're human beings, and things take time to develop, we get this concept or this idea of an increase of knowledge. And we tend to draw it with this escalating dotted line. and I tend to call it IK, increase of knowledge.
Yep.
And what this is demonstrating is we begin the history here, but it's the progressive increase of information or knowledge. So even though we're marking this thing right here, and I put it dead in the middle because it's a specific event, but yet it's being described, or what I really want to portray is that it's covering this period of time. And this is what I want to show you here, because here I'm not doing this 1, 2, 3 and putting 2 as a stick.
No.
I've rubbed that out and I've said 2 is this whole history spanning everything, and I don't want to do it as a stick because I want to make a different point. I want to make a point that this stick imagery doesn't help. So I've taken the stick out and produced it into a line. The reason why we're talking about this is because we've seen here some kind of separation that's gone on, and later on it's going to be talking about this shut door. So without you realising it, what I've begun to show you is that this 3-step process is a lot more complicated than we first explained to you, because there are characteristics of this third. What do you say the characteristics of the third are? We said there's a judgment, which means there's some kind of investigation going on. And someone's going to glorify God. They're going to reflect God. And how do you reflect God? You have to become one with Him, or as Christ would say, abide in me and I in you. So you have to abide in Christ. And the most perfect image that we have of abiding in Christ as human beings is marriage. You become one flesh. Okay? So you have multiple imagery going on here. There's this procession, and who's at the head of the procession?
The groom would be.
The groom and his bride. And then you've got the, I don't know, Jewish, how it works, if they're at the front or at the back or whatever, obviously. But I'm just making the point that you've got them here and people are following along. And so what have these people got in common with the bride and groom? They've joined with them. So the bride and groom have become one flesh. They're one. But symbolically also, everybody that's joined this procession have also become one. So you get this double symbology here of, if you join the procession, you become one with the bridal party. And if you're the bride, you become one with the groom. So there's this symbology of becoming one. That's why the 5 foolish, who never became one with the bridal party, can enter into the marriage festival, because they never became one. So you can see that in the story here at Midnight Cry, we're picking up all the characteristics that we're identifying at the 3rd step. But it's also got the characteristics of the 2nd step as well, because the 2nd step says you exhibit righteousness, you've got oil, or you don't have oil. They don't have oil, so they're fallen. They fall into the marketplace. But when they fall into the marketplace, they also don't join the procession. So they've got characteristics of both. This is what Brother Larry was bringing up at the end of the last presentation. It didn't get filmed, if people are asking that who was ever going to watch this. That these waymarks can have multiple characteristics, and we have to be careful how we decipher what characteristics we're picking up, so we don't divide the word of God incorrectly and make a mistake. So what I want to try and portray to you, without spending a lot of time doing it, is the following: that at this 2nd step, you get characteristics of the 3rd step. The easiest way I can explain it is this model that I've just given here. So another way to explain this is in the following way. let me just rub this out. How many reform lines have we done? 2 3/4.
No, 4.
No.
I think.
We haven't got to 4 yet. We haven't finished that one.
Oh, we
1,
started
2,
it.
3. We haven't finished the Millerites.
No,
1. We haven't even finished Millerite yet.
No.
no, that's really much.
2. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but there's still more details
Yeah.
that we want. So that's why I said 2 3/4. What was number 1?
That was the sample.
Example.
And number 2 was the number.
The name of them.
Oh well.
First one.
Example:
Moses,
Moses, Christ, Millerite.
Christ,
Millerite.
Millerite and then 144,000 potential.
Millerite, and we'll call this the 144 or the final generation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we just
Okay.
didn't get anywhere with that.
Yeah. So my question is, prematurely, because you haven't finished it, is what's the difference between these 4 lines of history? What's the difference between them? And we should all be able to say nothing, because it's the everlasting gospel. It's the same gospel, 3 steps. They're all the same. There's no difference. If there's no difference, why do they all look different?
Because they're different stories.
Because they're different stories. Now, different times,
different characters.
different characters. So we can learn something from each of those stories. So the reason we're going to go to all of these different stories is because we want to pick up certain things. So if you want to do a study on the Sabbath, you need to know when Sabbath begins. That would be one detail. You need to know what you're supposed to eat and how you cook it. That's another detail. Where you're supposed to go. That's another. You pick up different details. So we want to pick up different details from these stories. Now, what's the details of the story of Moses? Don't answer the question. It's rhetorical. I'm not going to answer my own question because you don't know what I'm asking. So here's Moses, 1, 2, 3, all straightforward. Christ, 1, 2, 3. Millerite, 1, 2, 3. And the story of 144,000, 1, 2, 3. What do we pick up? The main theme that runs through the story of Moses is the following. You've got God's people. Okay, this is an advanced study now. This is not a simple one. You've got God's people, and they are what? They're a church, and they're living in Egypt.
Yeah.
This is the state. So the simplest thing that we can bring to view here is when you get to the 3rd step, who's judged?
Everybody.
Everybody. Everybody's judged here. And if you went into the story in detail, you'd see that at number 2 and number 1, who's being judged, who's being dealt with. What you'll find is the story that Moses is trying to portray. The theme of Moses is the following. This is why it becomes advanced. Is because Egypt becomes a symbol.
Yeah.
So the question we want to ask is, what does Egypt symbolise? So remember, if I said, what does a lion symbolise, everybody wouldn't be so quick to answer. Because they'd say, a lion. I said, what does people would say, well, tell us the verse. Tell us the story before we answer. Because you know it's a trap, it's a trick question. Because it can be Satan or Christ. And you know you're going to get the wrong answer. Because if you say Satan, I'm going to say Christ. So you want to know what story is it so you give the correct answer. So it's the same with Egypt. Depends what the story is. Because everybody's saying it's the world because we've read so many stories that make Egypt the world. But you can make Egypt into something else. And Egypt is the country in which God's people live.
Yes.
So that gives you the clue.
Okay, Joseph. Story of Joseph.
So at the end of the world,
Yeah.
where do God's people live? Where's our headquarters?
United States.
So you can show really nicely that Egypt can represent the United States. That's where we're headquarters. That's where all of our leaders are, and all of the leaders in this story are all living in Egypt.
Yes.
All in Egypt. So Egypt is the United States. So this story here, Moses is teaching us this. It says God's people and the land are judged when? At the same time. So what you want to do is, when you do a study on Moses, what you should be looking out for when you read Ellen White's commentary on it and you do a detailed study about Genesis and then you go into Exodus, what you want to be picking up in as many ways as you can see is this theme that you're going to see God's people being judged and the land that they live in being judged at the same time. And then what you're going to do is take that history and bring it into our own history. So every catastrophe that happens, that hits the United States, what do you know? Based upon the story of Moses. And it took us about 2 minutes to work this one out. What do you know about God's people when you see something happening in the newspaper about America? America's being judged.
Yeah.
So what do you know is happening to God's church?
Oh,
They're being judged at the same time.
Yes.
Can you see it?
Yes.
Yeah.
You can't. Go and look at the church. Look at our records. We're going from strength to strength. The income is going up. We're doing more baptisms. Everything's looking good. Because if you stand on Mount Olivet and have a look over at Mount Moriah, the temple looks beautiful in the setting sun. And you can't see anything bad in Adventism. So if you go and track in the story of Moses and see these 3 steps, it's not that easy to distinguish these characteristics where these 2 nations are interlocked and they're being judged at the same time. But you can see it. But it's really hard at the end of the world to see what's happening in America as an average Adventist and realise, as you see that country falling to pieces, you know, you should know, if you understood the story of Moses, that this church is collapsing. But you can't see it. But you certainly can see America collapsing. It's in the news. Everybody knows that.
Okay. Yeah.
This church as in relation to
The organisation.
Adventism.
Overall.
18 million of us
Could it mean that
going down the tubes.
Could it be like a reference to the fact that we're the judgment of the living as well?
Yes, I'm keeping this really simple.
Oh, yeah.
There's many facets to this. But the point I want to pick up is that when we look at these reform lines,
Yeah.
we're not just looking at them as random stories. They have themes attached to them. And those themes we're supposed to draw into our own experience, and they explain what's happening today. So what you need to see is when the land is judged,
God's
the
people.
people are judged at the same time. This is God's people. So 9/11 was a judgment by God upon America. However way you want to understand that, however way you want to see it or process it, I'm not saying God did something or God didn't do something. Something bad happened to America. It was the most serious thing in the 21st century that turned this world upside down. So if there was something significant that happened in America, according to this rule here, you know, without ever seeing it, you can take it by faith if that's the way you want to express it, that something serious happened in God's church.
Mm.
Even if you can't see it,
Yeah.
even if you can't identify it, you have to know that something serious happened. But an easy one to see is in the summer of 2015, there are parallel events going on in the church and in the United States. And they're all dealing with
Marriage.
the issue of marriage, the relationship between men and women. So that was an easy one to see, really easy. When the land is making a decision, the church makes a decision at the same time. It's all happening in America. So you'll see this over and over again, this theme about the land and the people get judged. That's what we should be picking up in Moses. In the time of Christ, his line has another theme. Same story, but another theme. And this theme is 2 temple cleansings. And what is a temple?
Church.
Church. A building. A group of people. Corporate body. So, this two-temple cleansing is talking about in this history, and remember it's this history here, 1840 to October 44, AD 27 to AD 31, you're going to see two temple cleansings going on there. And the two temple cleansings are identifying a cleansing of a church that's going to occur twice, in two phases, in two steps. So you want to pick up this theme from that history and bring it into our own history. So at the end of the world, you're going to see that there are these two temple cleansings. And the two temple cleansings is, it's multifaceted. I was going to say it's complicated. It's not that complicated, but it's multifaceted. Because the temple, or God's church, is going to be cleaned twice in different ways. I'll give you the different ways. First of all, this is Adventism. This is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. What is the beginning of Adventism? Millerites. And the end is us. So, one church, you're going to have two temple cleansings. So this is teaching us the story of Christ. He's teaching you the following. That at the beginning of our church, we should expect to see a temple cleansing. And did we see one? We certainly did, because the church was married to Christ and the church was divorced from Christ. Remember Sardis? So there's a cleansing that's going on here. But there's a second cleansing going on at the end of the world. So you should expect to see all the characteristics of Millerite history being reproduced at the end of the world. In Adventism, you're going to see a separation because God's going to clean the church. He cleaned it once, He cleaned it twice. It's easy to see, hopefully. That's one temple cleansing. Another temple cleansing is first the church, then the world. And the world is a church, by the way, because it's full of spiritualism or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So there's number one cleansing, and there's number two. We'll call it the Alpha and the Omega. So two temple cleansings at the end of the world. First the church, then the world. Us, Adventism, then the world. Simple to see. I think Brother Patrick's going to develop that line and really nail it down. But in the time of Christ, it wasn't Moses the Alpha and Christ the Omega, and there was nothing happening in the world there. There were no temple cleansing in the world. All that cleansing that was going on was where? A purely internal work in the church. So we should expect to see a third type of temple cleansing, or two temple cleansings. So I'll put it here. Same history. We'll put 27 to 31, and without going into the intricacies of this, we've got an Alpha and Omega. Two temple cleansings. And who's being cleansed here? This is a story of the church. Only, purely the church. And it's this church at the end, not this church at the beginning. So you've got this two temple cleansing in three different levels. So you can see when you begin to do reform lines, which appear deceptively simple, there's a lot of information tucked behind them that is really fruitful study, and you could be spending hundreds of hours just looking at this one and look at two temple cleansing, and I've just given you three things to look at, and that's a lot of work. And we haven't even got to where we were going. This is just passing comment, and we're getting into all these details. So I want to make a point, and so this is the one temple cleansing, two temple cleansing, and there's the third one. Three different types of temple cleansing, but it's always happening two. And don't let this throw you out, because if Brother Patrick says the two temple cleansings of Christ is this story here, it is. But don't think that it's all that it is.
Yeah.
Because it means that also there's a cleansing at the end of the church as there was at the beginning. And it also means that there was a temple cleansing within the church. One here and one here. 2 temple cleansings in the time of Christ. So there's a lot of information when we deal with 2 temple cleansings. And Millerite history. The story of the Millerites is really straightforward. I've got it here. It's the parable of the 10 virgins. And we got that, remember, when we did Matthew 24, the brief overview, and then we went to 25 verse 1, then shall the kingdom of heaven look like these 10 virgins. And what's the story of the 10 virgins dealing with? Oh, there's lots of things. There's lots of things. It's the marriage, but I'm picking up 2 classes.
Oh, yeah.
It's these 2 classes, which is a recurring theme that we want to pick up. So at the end of the world, despite what our church teaches, if you go to a conference church and say, put your hands up if you're going to go to heaven, instruct them, only half of the church to put their hands up because the other half are not going to make it. And we're scared to give that message to our people, but we should be.
Isn't it 1 in 100? So half
Yeah,
is a
but
bit
the
generous.
principle.
Yes, it's a parable. It's only a parable. We're not looking at numbers, but you know, we should be instructing people through parables, and I think it would wake people up. If I get opportunity, I might even do that. Thinking about it, only half of you put your hand up, and the rest of you are lost. You're lost. That's what we should drum into people's minds, based upon Millerite history. That these 2 classes, it's an important thing to understand because we teach. Remember these idols that we've got. We're into idolatry, these false doctrine. That we have an everlasting gospel that is John 16, righteousness only, and we don't want to pick up Revelation 14. And if we do, Revelation 14 is dealing with the people that's outside of our group because it's Babylon. But I'm not saying we're Babylon when I make an application to ourselves, but we have to pick up that concept and that idea that there's these 2 groups. And if you take all of these 3 things and collapse them and bring it to our story, you see that there's a huge amount of study to do, but you have clear lines that show you what's happening in the church and the decision that you should be making, where you should worship, how you should be worshipping, what you're expecting to see. Look at America carefully. This presidential election, which is going to send that country down into serious trouble, something's going to happen in our church. It has to. Whether you see it or not, it doesn't matter. 2 temple cleansing, expect to see unity and division happening in our church. So when people say this message is divisive, your response should be, amen. Not to hide and say we're nice people and we don't break up churches, because it's a message that's designed to create 2 classes of people. I mean, let's see what the message is. It's designed to do that, and how can we say, well, don't blame us, we don't want to do that kind of stuff. When Paul goes into a place, he turns it upside down. You either love him or you hate him. It's as simple as that. You either love this message or you hate it. Christ says, I'm going to come into the families and the mother-in-law's going to hate her daughter-in-law. Period. I mean, it's prophesied. Why do we try and skirt around the issue? Brother Patrick said something, I didn't hear what he said.
Well, I also said that these elections also produce 2 classes in America.
True.
Yes.
Very much so.
Yes.
I didn't hear. What's he saying?
The presidential elections is creating 2 classes of people.
Just in America in general.
Yeah. So, we want to pick up all of these themes and we want to see that something's happening in our church. The Lord's cleaning this house up in 2 steps. 2 classes are going to be produced. And this church is being judged as America is being judged. So, you know, that's the purpose of reform lines beyond this repeating pattern, so you become familiar with it. So let's get rid of all of this, that, and all of this. So the only reason I mentioned all of that is that to show you when you come to reform lines and these 3 steps, there's a bit more involved in it than that first meets the eye. And so what I want to do, if you would allow me to, is where this number 2 is, this 2E, Midnight Cry, I want to put a little 3. Don't call it an imaginary 3, not a real 3. It's not real, but put a 3 there. And then what I want to do is quickly run through Millerite history. Okay, so here, did you do this? I'm not going over. I'm going over. As long as I'm going over, I don't want to do new stuff. I don't want to do anything new. So here, on the 19th of April, second angel's message said, Babylon is fallen, and this is the Millerites attacking. That's the right word. The Protestant churches. And I want to use the word protest, and I'm going to put, and the reason why they're attacking them is because of this, because they're no longer protesting against Catholicism. They've just gone back into darkness. There's no mention about Catholicism in this story. Right, just make that point. The Millerites are arguing or making an accusation against the Protestant churches and saying you have become Babylon. And so, if they've gone into Babylon, they're out of the race now. They're no longer in this story. If you're not in that story anymore, because you're in Babylon, the reason we can prove that, if we go to Jeremiah, we did this, I think. Here's Jeremiah. Here's the destruction of Jerusalem. And when Jerusalem destroyed, what's going to happen? God's people are going to go where? Into Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar's going to take them captive. They're going to go to Babylon. And who's this king? Zedekiah. We did start this when we were doing the 25-20. Let me just pull this back. Do this, like that. So that was our kind of template for the
end of
the 25-20. And this was Hoshea. Remember?
Yeah.
Hoshea's the last king. When Hoshea comes down, all the people are going to be going where? They're going to captivity, but they're going to Assyria. And Assyria and Babylon are the same thing. If you don't believe me, you can ask Ellen White's nephew in hymn number 596. So 596, Ellen White's nephew will tell you that they're the same thing. So if you close the probation, they're going to go to Assyria. Close the probation, they're going to go to Babylon. It's the same thing, they're going into Babylon. So when your probation closes, you go into Babylon. COP. So I've proven here, we could do more proofs than this. This is a really simplistic proof to show you that when you tell the Protestants that they've gone into Babylon, what have you just told them? Your probation has closed. The problem is, with Mark, close the probation at what step?
Third.
Number 3. So I apologetically put a 3 here. I'm going to have to put another one here. So now you've got this 3 problem here, but we've marked 3 over here.
Yeah.
I don't want to develop this anymore because we'll end up getting sidetracked. But the only point I want to pick up is right here, where you've got a number 2, you've got a number 3.
Okay.
And I'll give you the history about that, why it's happened. The Protestants are arguing, and they've fallen out of the way, and the Protestants say, sorry, the Millerites say, you're out of the race. There was one group of people here, from 1798 onward, and what was their name? Protestant. And their official name was Sardis. And Sardis is one group, one church, and how many people are in this group? 2. One of their names is Protestant, and one of the names is Miller. I'm going to swap them round. Here's Miller, here's Protestant. Here we come back to our story of that husband and wife who had a car accident, remember? They're going to run their race. Let's run the race. The Millerites are going to accept a message, and what they're going to do when they're judged? They're going to be righteous. And the Protestants, they're going to get to their number 2, and what's going to happen to them? They're going to fall away. What did Brother Patrick tell you made the Protestants fall?
Seventh truth.
Wasn't the Sabbath truth, I'm sorry. I'll tell you. It was the chart.
1840.
This is 1842.
Message.
1842,
April.
and it's the chart, the 43 chart.
Yeah, that's right.
So, this was their second step. It made them fall. So, we've got the first, the second, and here's our third step.
Uh-huh.
We've got 1, 2, 3 steps. 2 classes are separated. So these people are dead, Protestants, out of the picture. How many groups have you got now? Just one. And what's their name?
Philadelphia.
They're Millerites. We call them Millerites. And how many groups are there in the Millerites, according to the parable of the 10 virgins?
2.
Wise,
And foolish.
foolish. So here the wise and the foolish are going to go on their journey. What's going to happen to the wise?
They're going to increase, yeah.
They're going to go up, and the foolish are going to go down.
Fallen, yeah.
Okay, so when do the wise and foolish go up or down? It's here at the second step, remember?
Yeah.
So you can see that the second step has characteristics for the third. Just want to make one more point, because I'm going to just rub this out. And I'm going to do it a bit more complicated than that. Here we are, April the 19th. You've got all these Millerites, and they're all asleep. By the way, do you know why they're asleep? They're sleeping because they don't talk to each other. If you don't talk to each other, you're going to fall asleep. So in Australia, please be careful, because it's a huge country, that you communicate. Because if you don't communicate, you're going to fall asleep. I'm not making this up. I mean, this is Ellen White, Spirit Prophecy, says the reason why they fall asleep, there's other reasons, multiple reasons, but one of them is because they don't talk to each other. And talking to each other means they need to come together and study. Because they don't do that, they'll go to sleep. So here they are, these 2 people, and I don't know if we can. I'm going to.
Don't they all go to sleep?
Sorry?
What's the yeah,
They all go to sleep because none of them are talking to each other.
that's why.
Even the wise.
Even the wise. The sleep has multiple symbology. I only picked up one because I wanted to make one point. Because I want you all to talk to each other. But there's other things about the sleep that we could discuss, which are equally true. So here we are, the wise and the foolish. So I'm going to, here we are, the wise and the foolish. And they're going along their journey, and they don't even know when Christ is coming back anymore. So they've got no message. And if you've got no direct message, what you're going to have? You're going to have lots of different thoughts and ideas. So we could do a brainstorming session, and we're going to have lots of ideas. And if you've got lots of ideas, you know most of them are wrong. So if you've got most of them are wrong, then you've got confusion. So here you are, there's this message that's going along, and there's confusion. Because they haven't got a direct message. And in the midst of all of this message and all the confusion, fanaticism enters the ranks. And this was the Holy Flesh movement. We've got a lot of Holy Flesh people around today, by the way. So there's this Holy Flesh movement that's introduced into this message, and they're going wild. Study the reform line of Martin Luther. Martin Luther is a reform line. It's on the internet. I can't remember who's done that.
I think it's Heather.
Heather's done it. Sister Heather's done it, and Sister Tamina's done it. They're the two. They're the 2 people that I know that have done it. Other people may have done them as well. So here's this fanaticism that's entered into the rank, and the wise don't get involved in this, but the foolish do. And they're going to start going downhill, and they're going to start going uphill. And right here, this is in August, you have a camp meeting, and you're going to find, I don't want to go into the intricacies of this, you're going to find that the foolish basically get kicked out. And I don't mean that they get ejected, but they're out of the movement. There's events that are going on that they leave. And all you've got left are wise virgins, no one else to pass the test. If they're separated, you know that you had a 1 and a 2 and a 3 right here, which is this little 3 that we had.
Yeah.
Except what was 2? Kellogg.
No, Kellogg isn't, I don't think he's even born here.
What was
Kellogg is right down
no
here.
way, okay.
2 is
something else.
I don't want to go into it. We have to get bogged down into the history, and my remit wasn't Millerite history, because I want to make a point to prove that we can do what we're doing. So here, how many groups are there? There's one, it's the wise. But the wise are going to have another wise and a foolish experience. So this one group is going to be a wise and a foolish, and you're going to see the same thing here. And if you're going to get the same experience, you're going to get a 1, 2, and a 3. Over and over again, you're going to get these repeating patterns of 1, 2, and 3. And
that'll be the last 1, 2, 3, isn't it?
That's the last one. And for those of us who are familiar or not familiar, this is the subject of fractals.
Okay.
Or repeating patterns.
What's the number 2 test for the
Just trying to get out of that.
The last group.
after the midnight cry?
You have to ask Brother Patrick all of this. This is not my territory. I'm here. I'm only doing all of this to show you. To show you here, you've got a number 3 at the midnight cry. That was my purpose. That's all I wanted to do. It took a bit of effort to get there. So that's what I want to show you. And he's going to clean up the mess that I've just created.
So he's going to tell us what it all is. The 1, 2, 3.
If you ask him nicely, he may do that. I don't know.
Patrick.
So here I am. I've just dumped a whole load of mess in his lap. I'm going to rub all of this out. Because the point all I want to make is this. We've got this number 3 right here.
Right.
And I did it not through some kind of theoretical fractal, ideology or concept. I went through history, and I'm mapping the history with the concept, and they both fit. If you go through the history, you'll see that that's what happened. That people dropped out, and if you just apply a template over that, this template or the everlasting gospel in repeating patterns, you see it all fits. So what we're saying is, not only, and I don't mean this in some kind of exotic, not only do we know the history, we actually understand what the history means. We can go into that history and decipher what it means. When you put a 1, 2, 3 over that history, when you put it over the events that are happening, and that's what you're supposed to do. So go into the story of Jephthah or Noah or anybody, and you need to get your template and lay it over the story. If you get it to fit, then you know you've read the story correctly, and light opens up to you.
But it doesn't have to have all the components.
It doesn't have to have all the components, no. But it will almost always certainly have a 1, 2, and 3 steps. But we have, if you counted up, Brother Patrick would have probably given you 8, maybe 9, and that's even not everything. You can get to at least 10, 11.
Sets of 1, 2, 3.
No, lots of different intricacies.
Oh, yeah.
You don't have all of them, but you would have this 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a story that you wouldn't. There might be some obscure stories that would only focus heavily on one portion, and it might be really hard to find the other first and second steps. So all I'm trying to show you is here that the midnight cry, there was a separation that happened.
Yeah.
You can identify that in the Millerite history. At the Exeter camp meeting, there was a clear separation between 2 classes of people, and there are some really nice studies on the internet that talk about that. They go into the symbology, the history, the camp meeting, everything. It's a nice study you need to go to prove that that's correct. But I've just given you a really brief overview. I'm taking this concept here and pulling it down here to just show you that you can get a number 3 here at this step. That's all I wanted to do. That's the only purpose of doing that. So we've got 1, 2, and 3, and what we've seen is the number 3 is this 2 steps here between midnight and midnight cry. And all I've got here is midnight cry, by the way. You've just seen that midnight cry. But there wasn't enough. There was another event back here, which they identified as midnight. Interestingly enough, if you were to ask a Millerite in this history, who's living after April, say, what's the most important event that's just happened? And they would say it's midnight, because they understood the prophetic significance of midnight. They understood that, but they didn't understand the prophetic significance of the midnight cry. They didn't understand in the same way that we do what midnight cry was about. They're focused. So I'm going to put this is Millerite. Now you come to Adventism today, and our focus is Adventists, not ours as on this message, just only Adventists. So SDAs, they focus on the midnight cry. And the story of midnight is almost a lost story. So we've dug it out of those ancient manuscripts that are in our computers, and we've found that there was a midnight which Adventists have forgotten about, but we already know about the midnight cry. That's fairly well recognised. And so what we've done is, what we end up doing a lot of the time is that when you get, say, for instance, the 2520, and we go from, let me do this one, 677 to 1843-4, which is right here, 677, 1843 to 2520. This was William Miller, and this was Hiram Edson.
Yeah.
And he says that William Miller was wrong. He says that it shouldn't be this one, it should be this one. And again, this history here, we providentially were led to it. We dug it out of the manuscripts, and we found this. When I say we found it, I mean it's easy to find. It's not some magical thing that's like hid treasure. This is what Adventism knew, and this is what I'll put it the early. Let me put late and early SDAs. So there's always these two things, and at the end of the world, we only seem to have grasped one of them and forgotten the other one. But on this message, what we've found is that this one we understood, and when we found this one, we saw this discrepancy, and we said, actually, they're both right. So we've picked up both of these two things, and the same thing with here. We've picked up both of these, and they said they're both truth, and in fact, they're so important that they're actually shaping and moulding our understanding of end-time prophecy in a profound way, as these two truths did. That you need to understand both to understand end-time prophecy, and now you need to understand this. You need to understand the Millerite understanding and our own. So this is where we get this concept of midnight and midnight cry. And again, you can go back into this history and you can prove all of this. How the Millerites understood it, what it meant, the dates, the places, the events, everything. We've got all of that information, but we may not have time to cover it all whilst we're here. All I want to pick up is, if you go to the Parable of the 10 Virgins, it just says, at midnight there was a cry made. And this will stump most people, because it says in the chapter itself, it seems like to be a singular event. But it says at midnight there was a cry made. And when you go back into Millerite history, you can define it very accurately. There are these two separate waymarks, one at midnight and one at midnight cry. I've got August here, and this is a month earlier in July. So it's in July and August, midnight cry. Two separate events, two separate waymarks, different things are happening, but the same thing is happening. They're similar, but they're different. Question?
No,
I just said, I thought someone said June earlier, and he said that was 1842.
Oh yes, that was
Yeah.
June 1842.
Yeah.
This is July 21st,
Yeah.
August 15th. And we've got these two, we're pulling them directly out of Millerite history, putting them here, and we're attaching it to the third waymark, because we see a 1, 2, 3 in here. So that's what we're doing as we think about this history. And all of this has happened in maybe the last 2 years. It's quite new, and we're getting this progressive light about this third step. So this is the license to demonstrate that the third step is not just this point that we were speaking about before, but it's a period of time. We're not defining how long it could be. 10 years, 10 days, 10 minutes, it doesn't matter. That's not the point we're making. But it's got some history in there, some time period, and it's been defined prophetically by midnight to midnight cry. Please don't go into this history and try to calculate dates and separation and try and dovetail it into our thing to say, oh, it's about 25 days or something like that, or
No.
don't do that literally. You can do it symbolically if you want to.
Excuse me, what were the dates? July 21st?
July 21st and July and August 15th.
15.
15. So it took us a long time to get to this stage where hopefully you've persuaded you that we can do this. And it's important to understand this story here. So what we're doing is, I'm not so much interested at the moment about midnight to midnight cry, but what I am interested is to show you that the third step has two waymarks attached to it, and the proof of that was this dynamic here between midnight and midnight cry.
With another 1, 2, 3.
So there was the 1, 2, 3 in there, yeah, and so I've got the 1, 2, 3 here.
No, in between midnight and midnight.
Okay, yes, I'm not addressing that issue for the purposes of this presentation. I'm just leaving this as a singular thing. Let's
Seems
not
like
this
there's
up.
sifting upon the sifting upon the sifting upon the sifting.
Yeah, there are some intricacies about what happens in here, and we're not tackling the intricacies of that in these studies. We're just giving a brief overview because there's a lot of background information you need to know before you even delve into that, because it's like a black hole that's really deep. It's got so much information about it. So what I've done so far is showing you that you have the first, second, and third angel's messages. I've given in this way, and the simplest way I explained it was through justification, sanctification, and glorification. Then I said the closer you get up to the third waymark, just like if you looking at a star, what appeared to be a single event ends up being two events, two stars. And to prove this, I went back into Millerite history, and it was dealing with this issue here between midnight and midnight cry. But midnight and midnight cry is the second step. In fact, it's the empowerment. It's not even the arrival of this everlasting gospel. And I said I wanted to make that a 3. So I showed you how you can go about making that 3, and I gave you quite a bit of information to kind of help you along the way. And it's these 2 temple cleansings and development of 2 classes that gives you the ability to do that. And we saw that we could stick a number 3 here, and we could stick a number 3 here. We're sure we've got a number 3 here. And so that I don't confuse you, I put these in quotation marks because they're kind of like phantom 3s. They're not the 3 that we're really discussing. And I described it with the terminology, the mathematical term of fractals, which is just repeating patterns. And if you've got questions on that, Brother Patrick can explain fractals in a bit more depth. So I'm back here, and we've got to the position that I want us to all be, that we're now looking at the third step, and I want to just show you that the third step is this 2-step process, the first step and the second step. And it's a period of time, and the first and the second is all set up like that. So hopefully we're all together. And we do have to start off throat, so I know we've run out of time, but I just want to make, if I don't do this, it'd be shameful. So we're on page 2, because we're halfway through and I haven't opened my notes yet. Page 2.
Okay. Here we go.
So everybody's been to high school, I think. So you've been to school at some level, and we've all done English.
Yes.
And I don't mean you've learnt English, but you've done a language course. And when you did a language course, you were required to write essays or reports.
Yes.
It's the same the world over. And when you were taught to do it, You were taught in 3 steps. You were taught to do a report or an essay in 3 steps. And these 3 steps, I think someone asked a question, I think it's in one of our questions. These 3 steps comes up over and over and over again, because 3 has got some special properties to it. 3 and 4. And it's not coincidence, it's the everlasting gospel. The Lord's trying to drum this information into us over and over again. In fact, if you did a course in rhetoric or public speaking, and you did it properly, they would teach you that when you're making points, don't make more than 3 points because you're going to lose people. Anyway, that's the separate issue. So have these 3 steps, and the 3 steps is, first one, tell them what you will say.
Say what you will say.
Say it, and then tell them what you have said or told them, yeah? Whatever language you want to in there.
We say intro, body, and conclusion.
So yeah, so I'm going to put that in a minute, but I wanted to make it in this language because I want to make a point about this. Tell them what you're going to say it, and then tell them what you've already said. And I want us to see it conceptually that way. But this is, as you just said, the introduction and the body, and what did you call this? The conclusion. Okay, so this is the everlasting gospel, and if you don't believe me, when we did Revelation 14, 6 and 7, 8 and 9, 11, I'm going to start doing that often now, because we're friends, we can do that. 9, 11. Okay, in verses 6 and 7, what did it say? Fear God, give him glory, for the hour of his judgment has come. But this is the first message, the message of fear God, give him glory, for the hour of his judgment has come. So you've got the first, second and third, and you've got everything in the first. But what is the first? The introduction.
Yeah.
And it says, tell them what you're going to say. And you've told them right at the beginning what you're going to say. Fear God, give him glory, for the hour of his judgment has come. Now how good is that? That is nice. You know, what you were taught in English actually makes sense. Now you know why you were taught all of this stuff. It was seriously, so that you could understand prophecy.
Yeah.
It's been drummed into you. So here's the introduction, the first angel's message. Tell them what you're going to say, and you see that's what God does. Then say it, then tell them what you've already said. So if this is tell them what you've already said, what you're actually doing here, you're repeating. You can see that? Can we change that to repeat?
Yep.
So here's a repeat. And what did Brother Patrick tell you? One of our main rules is repeat and enlarge.
Yes.
So repeat and enlarge is saying the same thing. In fact, repeat and enlarge means repeat, but you just use a different word. Enlarge is what you just said. So you know that in the everlasting gospel, what you got? A repeat and enlargement in there. So we're going to prove this through the spirit of prophecy, what I'm going to say. But let's already work it out. So you're going to tell them what you're going to say. Here's number 1. Then you're going to say it. Number 2. Then you're going to do what? Repeat it. And if you're repeating it, that means this is the same as what?
Number 1.
What you've already done.
Yeah.
So another way of saying the same as, because we like numbers, remember, is equal.
Yeah.
Same as. So what we're saying, 1 and 2 equals
3.
3. Because 3 is the repeat of 1 and 2.
Wouldn't it be 1 plus 2 equals 3? I was going to say 1.
12.
Just as a matter of interest, he didn't touch it, but is 8 saying it, and was 9 and 11 summarising?
There's much more in this that we could go into.
I mean those verses
You
you
know,
put there.
you know when you gave the example of
Yeah.
Revelation, where it actually goes through the glorify, etc. He's asking, does it actually say what it says in verse 8 and then it repeats it all in...
Not the words are different.
Yeah.
The words are different.
But the principle.
What we're doing here is picking up concepts, but what you mustn't get tripped up on is that the words are all different. But if you can get the concept, you can go back, you can go away, and you're free to make all the mistakes that you want to, and study for yourselves, and it's safe. It's not dangerous to study by yourself if you understand the principles and concepts. What's dangerous is if I give you the details. If I give you the details on what to do, all the intricacies, it's dangerous because you end up copying and mimicking. It's far safer just to give you the concepts and say, go and play, go and study for yourself, go and work it out yourself, as long as you've got the guidelines and the rules. So, what we've done here, without you realising, is something fundamentally, it's a different way. That sounds dangerous, a different way of looking at the everlasting gospel, but it's true, because you've just worked it out yourself. These 3 steps, essays, introduction, body and conclusion, we already saw number 1 fits this model, and we're going to prove now for the Spirit of Prophecy, this is exactly what Ellen White's going to teach. And you said it here when you do it is, tell them what you've said, which means repeat. Repeating means it's equal to what you've already done beforehand. And this is the 3rd step, it equals the 1st and 2nd. So, I'll do this, but be very careful. I'm going to put a 1, 2, 3 in here. But this is not the everlasting gospel.
No.
Okay, there's something different about it. But if you do that, and this was the 3rd step, and I'm going to put the 3rd step here, you've got a 1 and 2, and you've got a 1 and 2 here. And you've seen that that's exactly what we're saying. The 3rd step is the 1 and 2. It has it built into it. But I'm going to rub this out because I don't want to make any point that might confuse people. But I want to pick up this point that the 3rd angel's message is the same as the 1st and the 2nd combined together. The reason why you want to understand this is the following. There are many people who have preached the 3rd angel's message at the end of the world thinking that they're experts, and I don't want to say that rudely, but they're not. And the reason I know that is because everybody who thinks they're teaching the 3rd angel's message, justification by faith in verity, or righteousness by faith message, or 1888 message, or whatever phraseology you use, ask any of them why they're not tackling the 1st and 2nd angel's messages and incorporating it into their message in a substantial fashion. Why aren't they doing that if this is true? And this is true. It's because they don't understand the 3rd. Because they don't understand the 3rd message is a combination of the 1st and 2nd, and you have to see that point to understand and deliver the 3rd angel's message correctly. And there is nobody doing that except one person. His name is Elijah. He has a message. This is the Elijah message. Not all of those erroneous messages that are out there, outside in Adventism, the Windsor Doctrine. These people, again, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but they don't know what they're talking about because they don't have a message that's based upon a correct understanding of prophecy. And I'm not blaming them, it's not their fault. It's not that we're special or we're experts or anything about us. It's just, it is what it is.
Ellen White.
Sorry. It's Ellen White's point.
Yes.
That all the messages are combined.
And she says you can't give a 1st without a 2nd, and if there's a 1st and a 2nd, there has to be a 3rd.
Or if there's a
All
third,
the
there
quotes,
has to be a first.
all the quotes that you're talking about, you can see that this message or this concept that I'm bringing has integrity because all it's doing is confirming what you already know.
Yeah.
But for most people, they don't know those quotes, they're not familiar with it, and so I'm approaching it to say, look at the concept here. Then when those quotes come in, you'll see those quotes just lock into this model in a really beautiful fashion. But many of us have been brought to those quotes as just factual information, and we've accepted them. Maybe we've not fully understood them. But when you see the concept, you just say, "Of course, it works. It makes sense." But the point I want to make is when people talk about the 3rd angel's message, they don't understand what it is. And Ellen White says, and it is in our notes, but I don't know what page it's on because it's Brother Patrick's ones, that those people who are preaching the 3rd angel's message are going to be following William Miller's rules.
Yeah.
And she lists his rules, the first 5, and containing those first 5 rules is built into this concept of repeat and enlargement. And this model here, even though it may not appear to be so, is can only be developed and understood if you're following William Miller's rules. So if you're not, you're going to have a model of the third angel's message that looks like that, and it's in isolation. And it doesn't incorporate the first and second angel's messages correctly or properly. Now, I'm not saying these people don't talk about the first and second angel's messages, because they do, because they're going to talk about justification and sanctification. But they don't incorporate it in the same way, in the correct way, that we're supposed to. So, one more thing I want to pick up is, if you go into a dictionary and we look at the word or the phrase binding off, that phrase actually means conclusion. So this third step here, the third angel's message, is the conclusion. So we've got 3 and we've got conclusion. And the dictionary definition of the binding off, and that's just a phrase that I've just picked up, but it's a spirit prophecy phrase that we're going to read. This phrase actually means conclusion. So here we have, I'm just going to shorten it to BO. So the third angel's message is the conclusion, is the binding off. And it's the conclusion of what? What is it the conclusion of? The conclusion of the first and second angel's messages. But what is this whole story? The everlasting gospel. So let's look at it this way now. The third angel's message equals the conclusion of the everlasting gospel. Therefore, the binding off is exactly the same. So this binding off message is the closing work or the conclusion or the repeating of what's already gone before. And this is wrapping things up. We've come to the end. When you come to the third angel's message, you've come to the end of the everlasting gospel. And what was the everlasting gospel? According to what we've just got up here. The first and the second angel's messages. And the first and second angel's messages are what? Justification and sanctification. Justification, sanctification is the everlasting gospel. And we're going to go into this into some depth to explain this, justify it and defend it in our notes. Let's close with prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your watch care over your people. We thank you for your goodness and your mercy towards us. We ask and pray, Lord, as we individually grapple with these concepts of the everlasting gospel, that we might begin to understand these things and that they may bring clarity, not confusion, to our hearts and to our minds. I pray, Lord, that we would spend the time meditating over these things, discussing them with one another, praying about the things that we're learning here. Father, we know that this is a holy convocation and we shouldn't spend our time idly. We should be spending our time in prayer and meditation and study. And may our conversation out of class be such as would honour and glorify you. Help us to realise, Lord, that you want to be with us and that you want to spend time with us. So may we not lose the precious moments that we have. We're already halfway through this encampment. We only have 3 short days to go. Please be with us during the second half of this convocation. And if we have not consecrated ourselves, if we've wasted time, may we turn away from such behaviour, Lord, and may our conversation be such as would honour you, even in our private conversations, in our rooms, where nobody's listening. Please be with us and please bless us, we pray and ask in the name of Jesus.
Amen.